Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
You're very welcome to this week's episode of the Signpost webinar series. My name is Cian Condon. I'm Outreach and Innovation Specialist with Teagasc and also the coordinator of this webinar series. This morning's topic is Invasive Alien Species, Practical Solutions from Acres CP. And we're joined today by a group of people with an absolute wealth of knowledge on this area. Firstly, I'll start with Lorraine Hope there. Lorraine is Project Officer with Acres West Connacht. We have Trisha Deane, Project Manager with Acres Co-op Kerry West Cork. And also by Kate Moore, and Kate is Invasive Species Engagement Officer with the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And also my colleague Mícheál Kelly, and lots of you will be familiar with Mícheál, and Mícheál will be assisting and adapting some of the questions as they come in. Lorraine, I think you're up first.
Good morning, my name is Lorraine Hope. I'm the Project Officer with Acres West Connacht, and today myself and Trisha Deane are going to be talking to you a bit about some of the work that the Acres CP teams are doing in relation to invasive species. So Acres is the current agriclimate and rural environmental scheme that many of the farmers in Ireland are currently enrolled in since 2023. And we work with the farmers that are in the CP approach. And those are farmers that are in the 8 CP zones that are in the coloured areas on the map here. And in those areas, we have high concentrations of semi-natural habitats. We have a high concentration of Natura 2000 sites and prior to water catchments and I suppose and protected species as well. So we're working with farmers in those areas. So what is an invasive species? Kate would have done a great presentation last year on this, but just to recap on it, it's a plant, an animal or a pathogen that is alien to Ireland. It hasn't always been here, it's non-native, exotic, and generally they have arrived here either because of human intervention, whether it's been intentional or unintentional, and they haven't made their way here naturally. And once they're here, they're not only surviving, but they're thriving and spreading out into the wider landscape. So they can spread by a number of ways. Naturally, by wind, the seeds are spread on the wind. We find that seeds are making their ways into the water. They can spread also through animals and birds. There's also human activity that can also exacerbate the spread of the plant or be used as a pathway for these plants to spread. And that can be through gardening. We often find in common surveying that we're seeing garden waste being dumped in our commonages and inadvertently bringing invasives with them. It can be transported on machines, on vehicles, and through the movement of soil. And there can be deliberate introduction, and that's where we often come across a lot of very large rhododendron boundary hedges where farmers have actually planted them for shelter for their livestock. Invasive species, we're looking at 2 today, rhododendron and gunnera, and they are regulated species under the EU Invasive Alien Species regulations, and which makes them an offence to not only disperse them or to allow them to escape. And the management of invasive species ultimately is the responsibility of the landowner. So why do they matter? Well, they're a huge threat to our biodiversity, and Ireland currently has, in more recent reports, we're losing about 50% or 50% of our biodiversity is already under threat. And while at the same time, invasive species are on the increase, over 50% of the invasive species here are gaining in our habitats. And while they're here, they're threatening our designated habitats and species. We've got a loss of ecosystem processes and the habitat structures are changed. We see there are peatland habitats where rhododendron is invading them, that they're altering the hydrology of these peatlands and ultimately changing them. And then, of course, for the farmers, there's a loss of productive land. We're losing land at this time that we need to keep in farming, and there's the cost of it. It's a huge cost for farmers, even of their time to try and manage if they have an invasive on their land. And there's the economic cost as well of trying to manage these. There's a visual impact. This is gunnera. When it's on its way dying back in Achill, it's a very ugly looking plant during the winter, it turns all brown, leaves bare soil behind. So there is a visual impact as well. And the Acres scheme, it's a results-based scheme. So we use a number of scorecards to assess the habitat quality and the environmental services of the farmland. And there's 10 scorecards that we use depending on the species or habitat that the environmental that have been supported on the farmland. And we have this question on each of our scorecards in relation to non-native invasive species. And depending on if they are present on the farmland and the actual density or abundance of them will affect the farmer's score. So having invasives on farmland is reducing the amount of money that farmers are getting paid through the scheme. Most people would be familiar with the rhododendron. Gunnera as well, we're going to be talking about. Japanese knotweed would be well known by a lot of people. A lot of horror stories regarding Japanese knotweed. Might be less common is the Himalayan balsam, quite a pretty plant, grows along watercourses and rivers. And then the cotoneaster is another garden escape here. Many of you might have it in your garden, but the actual berries of it are eaten by the birds and then makes its way out into the wild, and currently is quite problematic on our limestone grasslands. Giant hogweed, not to be confused with our common hogweed, which is a positive indicator on our scorecards. The giant hogweed is huge, so if you have that, you're going to know about it. Self-sown conifers are also recorded, and what we have is a lot of them seeding in on peatland that's bordering the coniferous plantations. So it's important to control them because they are changing the habitat of the peatland. One of the things we've done with these scorecards is that we've collected a lot of data in relation to how widespread invasive species or how common they are on farmland. And just in regards to West Connacht, we found that they were recorded on at least a fifth of farms, private and commonage. They were more commonly recorded on commonage land, which is not surprising because a lot of commonage is on kind of mature sites where it would be more difficult for shareholders to undertake work on them. And we found that rhododendron and gunnera were the top two invasives recorded in West Connacht. We were more commonly found invasives on peatland than on grassland. And the good news is that at this stage, we're finding that what we're recording was more low to moderate cover, and that having high or severe was less frequently recorded on our scorecards. So we're at a good stage to get some control in relation to these invasive species. I have the great pleasure of working on Achill Island, and it has a couple of problematic invasive species. And one of them is a superpower invasive as far as I'm concerned, and that's Gunnera tinctoria. So it was introduced to Achill into an estate house in about in the late 1800s. And from there, it's been spreading into the wild since the 1930s when it was recorded there. And farmers have been battling it ever since. It originates from South America. It grows in Chile, Argentina, and Colombia. It grows on the edges of temperate rainforest there, in watercourses, and on the sides of kind of mountains. And it really Achill isn't the place for it, but it has found a welcome home there because it doesn't like shade, and Achill is pretty much an area that is unshaded, with pretty treeless, so it has no competition there. So that's one of the traits, why some of these invasives get a foothold, is that if there's no competition there, they can survive and thrive. The distribution of Gunnera is generally, we see more of it along the western coasts or along the coastal areas because it really benefits from the wet Atlantic climate that we have there. So it's a moisture-loving plant. It likes to grow in wet areas and getting the moisture from the Atlantic. We're also starting to see more records of it inland as well. Just in relation to what this plant looks like, it does has a common name as wild rhubarb or Chilean rhubarb. It does look like our own rhubarb plant, but trust me, it's very different. Huge. It grows up to 2.5 meters in height. The leaf itself could have a 2-meter diameter. Its growing season is from February, so it emerges earlier than all our native species, and so can outshade them and outcompete them because they're emerging later in the spring season. It grows from these kind of root systems or rhizomes along the ground, and from that, numerous plants will grow from these growing tips. It has also its own nitrogen supply. It's got a nitrogen fixing relationship where it can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So it has a lot of powerful traits to have an advantage over our native species. How it spreads, it has a number of ways of spreading as well. So it grows these spikelets or florets, and from those it produces seeds. They start to ripen in July or August, turning this orangey red color. And each plant has the ability to produce like up to 7 of these seed heads, and the seed heads can grow up to 1 meter in height on mature plants. And one seed head can have up to 250,000 seeds. So it's a prolific seed producer that's going into the seed bank below it and also into the wider landscape. These are the rhizomes I was talking about. So they can grow laterally along the ground. One of the studies recorded that about 24 centimetres it can spread every year. So it's growing laterally as well. We see it spreading in our water courses. There's and drains in Achill, and where it makes its way in, and seeds will flow down further and invade into new and colonize new areas. A bit like Japanese knotweed, little pieces of the root itself can vegetatively create a new plant. So it's really important not to disturb this plant because you can produce more of it and not to take it off site. So in relation to the gunner, then we decided to create a kind of a study site down in Achill in order to look at the management solutions and control for gunner. We needed to know more about this plant. So with an acres farmer, we set up a study site on a severely infested area of grassland and did a few trials on it in relation to the management of it in 2024 and 2025, and we'll be continuing that work now in 2026. So our first thing was to look at site management of it. So another study had used the old Irish goat from Mulranny, who are currently been used to graze on gorse up in Howth. So these are a great species, great animal to kind of come in and graze on problematic plants, like hazel, gorse, bracken. They're pretty hardy and can be out in the landscape, and they're trained on this no fence collar. So what we did was we had them to come in and do the site management, as in clear all the biomass. So it made it much more easier to come in and do the cut and stem and cut and injection herbicide methods that we were going to use. And we wanted to make sure that by using this clearance that it wasn't going to affect the absorption of herbicide. And we found that it didn't. So this could be an option for difficult sites, is to clear it first in order with the goats before doing herbicide treatment. One of the control methods that we have as a landscape action, the method that we need to include, as well as the herbicide treatment, is the manual seed head removal. And this is something that farmers will be doing now that have the gunner management action already in place through the acres scheme. So we're cutting the seed heads before they ripen in May and June and just leaving them to rot on site. So we're just taking out the seeds from this season's growth. The stalk cut and paint method is a herbicide control method that is used on gunnera. It's most effectively to do this in August and September when the plant is just before it dies back. So we're kind of hitting it before at a vulnerable time, and before it can actually, if it wasn't completely killed, it could have emerged more plants. We're just cutting the stalks at the base and applying a herbicide glyphosate mixture onto it. So that's very carefully by painting it on the stump. And so there's no herbicide making its way out of the vegetation around it. So it's a very safe method to use. We also use rhizome injection of the herbicide, and this is by drilling into those large root systems, especially good to be using this on mature plants. And we're drilling holes every 10, 15 centimetres and applying the glyphosate directly into the rhizome. And again, this needs to be done in August and September. It's really important when working with any kind of invasive that there's strong biosecurity measures in place. So you're cleaning any equipment, footwear that you're using on site. So we don't want to transport any of that plant anywhere else with us. This is what one of the control or plots that we worked on looked like in 2024. So there was 100% cover. This plant was growing up to 2.5 meters. And in this one, actually, we did it by manual clearance. So we cut the stems and did the cut and stem method or cut and stalk method here on this plant. Quite labor intensive, difficult enough. But a year on, this is what the site looked like. I was quite nervous to know if this is going to be effective or not, and quite pleasantly surprised when we came back the following year and found that we had suppressed a lot of the growth, killed a lot of it as well. We did have gunnera coming back, and this is what we need to manage with follow-up and with expectations. And the other thing we have is a great recovery of the grassland species here. So we have a lot of our positive indicators in grassland covered over 100%, because what was there beforehand was pretty much bare soil with only an odd 1 or 2 plants that were able to survive under the gunnera. Now we have a whole area covered with grassland species. We retreated in 2025 and did the injection. And again, we have further kill of the plant, but you can see there's a couple of plants still hanging on. Some of them have got root systems that are outside the plot and they're able to survive from that. But again, we have really good recovery of our grassland species, and the rhizomes are just starting to die back. And this is 2 years, this was just last week. So we have a lot of our beautiful positive species growing there. The farmer will be undertaking follow-up treatment on this site and further treatment of the site this summer, who's already started. So this is an important consideration in when we start doing control. Can we restore the habitat to something of good quality? What's going to come back? Because there's a lot of effort and money goes into this. So can we restore a grassland community? And the evidence is there that we are already restoring back to a semi-natural grassland here, which is good for the farmer because this is exactly what we want him to have. There was an increase in the plant diversity. We had ragged robin, orchids, purple loosestrife, all there, loads of pollinators and butterflies using the site now as well. And it's important that we have a really healthy sward in order to suppress any seeds that are in that seed bank. Even when we kill those mature plants, we have thousands of seeds in the seed bank. So grazing is going to be part of our management going forward, and extensive grazing, because sheep themselves can help manage any seeds that might start to emerge. If we time it right, they'll browse on those at certain times. And the other thing is that we're going to need consistent monitoring going forward on these sites and follow-up treatment. So we need to have long-term plans and long-term money and funding available for invasive species. One-off treatments or one-off plans aren't going to be enough. It needs to be a year-on-year follow-up plan for at least 5, if not 10 years, depending on the invasive you're dealing with. So just what do you do if you have an invasive or see an invasive? I know there's farmers here on this that might not be in the CP scheme. It's really important that we do we act straight away. Like, don't wait until you have a problem. If you see one seedling emerging, that's the time to get it. Seek professional advice. There's a lot of stakeholders out there that have knowledge about invasives. So do try, either if you're in the CP team, reach out to us. If you have a farm advisor, or go to the invasives.ie. There's great information there. Avoid disturbance of plant until you know exactly what you're dealing with. If you have gunner, even if you have it in your garden, just even cut the seed heads could prevent it from spreading out into the wider landscape. If you have sightings of invasives, it's really good that we're getting more data up on the biodiversity data records. It's important for us to know for planning in the future how much invasives are out there. And farmers, as I said, we have landscape actions available with training. So if you have an invasive, reach out to us. The time is now so that we can get these actions in for you. And thank you for listening. I will pass it over to Trisha.
So like Lorraine has said, there's landscape actions, there's specific actions that are available to farmers in the cooperation approach of the agri-environmental scheme of acres, and these are focusing on invasive species management, quite a lot of them. They're looking at encroach and scrub, and there's a lot of water protection measures as well. It's not all about invasives, but the invasives is why we're here today, so we'll be talking about this. So there's a huge benefit of actually undertaking these actions, and they have been designed to target the environmental issues that have been highlighted in the scorecards. Because as Lorraine said, if there's something highlighted in the scorecard, then there's a landscape action that should help deal with the issue that's been highlighted in the scorecard. So we're looking at improving both the habitat, but also improving the results-based score that can be achieved on the field, on the private land, or on the commonage, and increasing in the habitat value, but also increasing in the payment for the farmer. Okay, so how farmers do that, then they contact their CP team, and CP teams can put in the plan to deal with the invasive. So Lorraine has covered this as well, all of the different invasives, and thank God these are all the measures that are available as landscape actions. So you can do Japanese knotweed, there's gunner management, there's follow-up actions as well for all these. Himalayan balsam was another one. The stem injection or the foliar, there's different options depending on where the invasive is on your farm, and everyone's going to be a little bit different. Some people will have watercourses in their farm, and obviously we can't be using any herbicide at all in your watercourses, so you'd be doing very targeted stem injection. Very similar for the Japanese knotweed as to how Lorraine described it there, the stem injection going right into the plant itself to treat it. And then rhododendron, I'll be giving you an overview now of rhododendron. There's also salmonberry. We don't have any of that down here in Kerry West Cork that we're aware of. I think there's a problem with it in Donegal. So it's great there. This is the first time that funding is available for farmers to try and deal with these invasives on their farms. So they're the invasive ones. So what about rhododendron? Well, it is abundant throughout the country, actually. The west of Ireland seems to have it in huge polygons, huge, big, massive areas. It is abundant in our area here in Kerry West Cork. And anyone driving around Killarney National Park on down towards Lorrock to Sist, on down towards Glengariff, the whole area, you'll see it when it's flowering, and it's very, very obvious when it's flowering. Why is it so prolific in these areas? Well, it prefers acidic soil, so it loves peatland or grasslands and peat soils. It really does love the acidic nature of the soils. It will reproduces via seed and suckers. It's very dense thicket stem, anything from 3 to 8 meters in height, so it can become quite large, quite dominant, and then no different to the gunner, like Lorraine has explained, huge amount of seed as well. Very waxy leaves, so it's very important then that it's treated correctly. Foliar spraying is not allowed at all on rhododendron. It does not work easily because the herbicide would just run off the plant and you cause damage to the nearby plants and habitat, but you wouldn't actually do anything at all to the rhododendron itself. So they're typically a purpley kind of a pink flower, and they can start flowering at age 10, but it can be earlier. So if the plant has been disturbed in any way, that's what will happen. It will start flowering a little bit sooner. It fights back, okay? So what negative impacts does it have? No different to the other invasives. It shades out completely into the native plants, outcompetes the native plants, takes over everything. And what you end up then inside is dense, massive thickets with nothing growing underneath them. There's no light at all that can penetrate the ground, so nothing else can grow in those areas. There can cause poisoning to livestock, so farmers would have reported this happening if livestock came in from an outside plot. If they weren't sure what rhododendron was, they'd go for the green foliage and they can get very sick and they can die. There's a lot of toxins inside in rhododendron. And obviously, no different to the other invasives, it can take over huge areas, can take over massive areas, spread very quickly, and it can result in the loss of productivity. So very similar to cherry laurel. Okay, so cherry laurel and rhododendron are the one action in acres cooperation as a landscape action. Cherry laurel is similar enough. It can grow higher than the rhododendron, about 14 meters height. And again, it does the same thing. It can suffocate out the habitats it invades. So you can find it a lot in woodlands and hedgerows. So this is a big problem. I don't know if this is true, but they say that almond scented leaves when it's crushed. I don't get that scent myself, but some people do think it's like almonds. And it's got small teeth inside. It's also evergreen, so it's quite easy to spot. And it has about, it's similar to rhodo, but different looking leaves. Okay. So again, this is kind of when we look at the scorecard. So there's all the different scorecards that Lorraine has described, and particularly a big impact on the peatland scorecard because it loves the acidic soils again of the peats. So it spreads very quickly, and this would be a typical example of how a farmer would score. So you might have a very good, in this case, it's a commonage, but there's rhododendron present on it. So the farmer would get 10 marks for having the presence of invasive species. The presence would be low, so he's losing 5 marks, but that's taking out 15 marks straight away from the farmer's score. Okay, but if he came and did a little bit of the work as a landscape action to try and remove the rhododendron, take out that low cover and get rid of it, he could move his payment up. So the example we hear is the score is 85 out of 100. That gets rounded up to 9. That's 350 hectare. But if you got rid of those couple of invasives that have been recorded, the couple of rhododendron, you could move up to 10 out of 10 or 400 a hectare. Okay, so that's what we're trying to leverage to move forward and increase the score all the time. Okay. So how do we map it? So we obviously have to look at it. We can't just, scratch our heads when we look at it. We look at the different infestation levels, and that's how rhododendron is assessed. There's a severe, high, medium, scattered, and then there's also a follow-up. So this is the difference, and we have some pictures now coming up in a minute to describe each of these different infestation levels. And that's what the payments would be based on as well, would be the level of infestation. And obviously it can vary from site to site, and you could have some sites with more than one level of infestation. Okay, and again, it's the wind generally that spreads the rhododendron, but birds can also spread it, and it can be spread the seeds on livestock, even sheep. The seeds are tiny; they're about the top of a pin, a wire. That's the size of the seeds. Very, very small, but very well able to spread. Okay. So when we look at a scattered invasive, this is what we're looking. They're small plants, scattered plants that haven't started to flower, but they can cover a large area. So you could find some of these, and the place could be very, very small. Hard to see them if there's a lot of growth in and around them, but they could be there. Once you start looking, it's very hard not to see them. And again, like Lorraine said, at this stage, if it's just coming in, very important to deal with it at this stage so it doesn't continue to spread and become a bigger problem down the road. Okay, if we're looking at a medium covered, these are not forming thickets yet or clumps. There's some flowering. There would be a lot of seedlings present. They're smaller plants than a high or severe level of infestation. Okay, so that's an example there. You can see them having to spread out. When we're getting into the high, then These are plants that haven't created a dense thicket, but they will do so. So they'll get really hard and be very hard then to get in under those plants and treat them. And they're typically 12 to 24 years old. And lots of seedlings again, because if there's any flowering at all, the seedlings will be there in huge numbers. Okay. And then you could be looking at severe, and this is where you're in real trouble. There's no ground flora there at all. It's completely gone. Very little light, if any, reaching the ground. There has been a lot of research done in this area, and a lot of the time they're finding there's no light penetrating through these areas at all. And again, these plants could be there with 30 years. Okay. So in acres again, and we've said this, we do the treatment, and following on from training, all farmers receive training on exactly how to treat the invasive in a very targeted way. And then we do follow-up treatment. And again, this is vitally important, because despite your best effort, you will never knock it out. And I think Lorraine demonstrated that very well there with the gunnerbit trials they were doing. But again, rhododendron would be very similar to that. So you see here an awful lot of rhododendron brash from an area that was treated, but you can see the new seeds that were sitting there in the ground, and they're starting to shoot up. They're getting light. They'll come back. So follow-up treatment is critically important. Okay. So again, we always tell the farmers, and this is very important for anyone at all using herbicides, everything has to be done according to the regulations there, the pesticide regulations. So there has to be a pest management, and records have to be kept, plant protection, record sheets, everything has to be completed. And again, this is all covered in the training with the farmers. Now, obviously, herbicide and pesticides are only ever considered where the plant with the invasive, there's no other way to treat it. This is not a decision that's arrived lightly, but unfortunately with rhododendron, it is the only way to get rid of it. Okay. So to use a herbicide, everyone should have done a course, a 2-day course on the use of herbicide, and you get what's called a professional user number, a PU number, after completing the 2-day course. And the course is excellent. It covers the environmental constraints of using herbicide. It covers the health constraints and the concerns that we have there. So it's an excellent course for anyone to do. So all of our farmers would be meeting these requirements. They'd be advised to do this, keeping all their records, storing the herbicide correctly as well before they do anything. So what do the farmers get under acres? Well, they'd get a letter from the department. They'd also get maps from the department outlining the areas where it needs to be treated. So you can see the example here, quite a large spread here of rhododendron at different levels on this farm. So it's very important then that the farmer can identify where to target first. Okay, so what we do is we follow up with site-specific plans that we send out to the farmers. And again, training has to be carried out before any work is actually carried out. So training is mandatory, and we cover the theory of rhododendron and how it travels and how it spreads and how not to treat it. And then we also do a practical demonstration with the farmers on how to treat it effectively. Okay, so this is a close-up here of a site-specific plan. So you can see here the different levels of infestation on the plan. And this is a close-up to the maps that the Department of Agriculture would issue to the farmers. And again, it's just kind of giving a zoomed in for the farmer to help them identify. So what we'd be encouraging the farmers to do is to do each area, or we call them polygons, one by one. You don't want to do half of a job. You want to complete one of these areas before you move to the next area. It's up to the farmers themselves if they want to start with the higher level of infestation first and then move to the scattered. But as long as the work is done according to the specifications and the training they've been delivered, the farmer should receive payment for carrying out the work if it's been done according to specifications and the training. But it's important that each area is done bit by bit. Okay. So that's what we call them. The little map shows the areas called polygons where the invasives occur, what has to be treated, and then we always tell farmers, come do the complete polygon. But it has to be done according to the site-specific plan. Okay, so there's two different ways to treat rhododendron and cherry laurel. There's stem injection or stump treatment. It will depend, how do we decide? It will depend on the size, the intensity and the accessibility of the plant or the stand. If it's a big, large stand, you would be very, very hard pushed to try and get in and stump treat it. Okay, and we'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. So you generally go in with a chainsaw there, cut the plants down right to the base, and then you get in and treat it. So we'll talk about the pros and cons, because again, every farm is different. But it's very important to note when herbicides are being used, they must only be used in dry, calm conditions with no dew or frost. Frost has a big impact itself on the herbicide, and there can be no rain forecast for about 12 hours following the application. Why is that? You don't want your herbicide to run off the plant, because then your time and effort will have for nothing. Okay. So what are we talking about here? So this is an example where you go in with the hatchet down to the base of the plant. You have to get down to the base of the plant. If you don't get down into the base of the plant, and if you go up too high, it'll continue to grow below that. So you have to get down below all the growing stumps. So it's very targeted. That's the upside of it. Very minimal amount of chemical application. The plant is left to die, so you can see that the plant has died successfully, because it will die standing. The colour of the plant will change, and it'll be very obvious that it's been completely treated. So you notch your way around the plant, and when you put a notch, depending on the size of the trunk of the tree, you go right the way around it. The bigger the trunk, the more notches you put in, and you apply your little bit of herbicide. So it's very obvious if you've missed parts of the plant, what parts of the plant you've missed. So you might have done two equal distant sizes of it, but you might have had to put another notch on one side, so you'll see that it continues to grow. So it's very helpful because it discolours. You can see there we've used a blue indicator dye in the herbicide as well, and that's very helpful because you can remember afterwards what's been treated and what hasn't been treated. So that's why the indicator dye is very beneficial for farmers to use it. Again, there's reduced cost in comparison to stump treatment, because you can do this by hand, and this is helpful for the smaller plants, but it can be very difficult to reach some of the lowest points in some of the dense multi-stemmed plants. Okay, so again, it depends. So if you're looking at your stump treatment, this is it with the chainsaw. And again, sometimes the areas, if there's rocks and things like that, you could do quite a lot of damage to the chainsaw. It could be very challenging, rhododendron, particularly if it's there for a long time. So trying to get into the base of it isn't always easy. But if you don't get into the base, it will continue to put out new shoots. So what are the pros here? Well, the ability to cut a very large volume very quickly. Now, the one thing we must remember is when we're treating rhododendron, you have to actually apply the herbicide straight away, because it actually self-seals. So once the plant is nicked with the hatchet at the base, around the base of the plant, or if the chainsaw is used, the herbicide and the dye must be applied straight away. Otherwise, it'll self-seal. Okay, so but you could end up with it is quicker, but so you could open up an awful lot of areas where there's been a lot of dense. The downside of it, I suppose, is there's a huge amount of brash that can be generated from the cut material, and then you're trying to stack that nice and neatly on a site, and that's very challenging because you're trying to move brash. What you don't want to happen is new seedlings to come up underneath where you stack the brash, and that can happen, and then you're trying to move brash to get the new seedlings. So obviously the cost is a little bit higher as well, because you need the chainsaw, you need the blades, you need the oil, petrol, the whole lot. Okay, so there's a higher cost here.
Just a few minutes there, Trisha, if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Nearly there now. So the good news, I suppose, is with rhododendron and cherry laurel, they can be treated all year round. Again, it goes back to the weather dependency and the site-specific plan. So again, if the weather is bad, we said that already, you can't do it. And then maybe in raptor areas, that's where you'd be, you could be in your site-specific plan not to carry out work in certain times, because there could be ground nesting birds and you don't want to disturb those. So follow-up then can be done afterwards once the initial treatment has been verified and claimed and completed. Okay, so obviously we know this. There's a lot of environmental considerations, and doing it incorrectly. We often get asked about burning rhododendron. It doesn't work. It helps it spread more. Cutting, if you don't cut it correctly, and if you don't apply the herbicide, it will come back. Foliar spraying, I've mentioned already at the outset, does not work. And digging can be very challenging, trying to get that root system, because it's got a very good, strong root system. So it has to be done correctly. The PPE, again, protecting yourself when you're using herbicide. We cover all that, the training. And Lorraine mentioned the biosecurity measures, very, very important to make sure that you're checking yourself afterwards. I've mentioned this already as well. Herbicides have to be handled with care. And again, anywhere near watercourses, it's a specific, that's why the treatment is so targeted. We have to be very careful doing anything at all near surface watercourses, drains, lakes, rivers, streams, whatever it is. Okay, so there's a few resources there, and we can make these available afterwards to people, but there's the different publications, and we did in a previous project with the Kerry Biosphere, we would have produced a little booklet there as well, and there's also YouTube videos. So if you have any questions at all, come to your CP team, hopefully we'll be able to help.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million, Trisha. You can see the questions are raining in, so I just want a real quick question. I myself could be anybody out walking or, fishing or whatever the case may be. You'd come across, could be rhododendron, Japanese knotweed, whatever the case may be. Should that really be reported? I know there's been a question or two on it, but just immediately to just look at that. Annie, you can come in. I know Kate has already put something in the chat, but just to nail that down is, if you do see an invasive, a lot of these areas probably aren't, they're not intensively farmed, and things like this can go unnoticed until, there's a bit of a problem. So can we just maybe address that immediately? Yeah.
I don't mind taking that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be important to report sightings of invasives wherever you do find them. And that just helps us track our spread. And then that can feed into the work that other organizations are doing. So they take the data from the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and that influences policy or even conservation projects, and likely feeds into the work that Acres is doing as well, so that we can actually map where the species are. So I've put a link there in the chat to where people can report their sightings. And we do ask that people include a photo, because then that helps us verify the identification of the species as well.
And there's an app, does that work? Does that link in for that?
So the data center does have an app, but it's not currently available for download on Android phones. Right. So we are upgrading our systems, but you can access the invasive species forum on the website as well. And you can access that through your phone as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Mícheál, you have your work cut out. The questions are absolutely raining in here. I hope we may be able to circulate kind of an FAQ or look at these questions and amalgamate them after, because we have a huge number of questions after coming in here. Mícheál, I'll throw that to you there.
Yeah, it's definitely congrats to all the presenters there. It's definitely after generating a lot of queries and questions, which is a good sign. Just Lorraine here on the Gunner. There was questions about when you remove the seed heads. Are you leaving them on site to rot, or do you have to bag them to avoid the seeds entering the seed bank?
So we're cutting them at a time when they haven't ripened. So we're just allowing them just to drop where they are on site and leave them to rot. So they're not going to be viable seeds. So there's no issue by cutting them in May and June. They ripen then later, July, August is actually when the seeds themselves ripen. So that's simply leave them to rot. No need to bag. Perfect.
And then there's two related questions here. One was what herbicide can you use on gunra? And the other one then would be, can goats be used to graze the regrowth after herbicide treatment, or does the herbicide persist in the plant tissue and pose a risk to the livestock?
So in relation to what herbicide, we were using glyphosate is what we were using. I'm sure farmers have mentioned other ones that they've used, but we just, with regards to the methods that we're using, we had to use a herbicide that was licensed to be used in a backpack sprayer. The goats, we wouldn't have any livestock on site immediately after having done any herbicide treatment. So you'd be using just like any other kind of treatment. If you're spraying rushes or thistles or that, you're not going to have livestock near until at least a couple of weeks afterwards. We would be grazing those sites a couple of months later, would be fine to graze around. The gunner themselves is just dying back. And the year after is when we're starting to see any regrowth. That's probably when it's a good time to target any regrowth with livestock. Now, sheep, we don't have to just use goats. Sheep are very effective at grazing down any new seedlings or the new growth at certain times because it's more palatable. Cattle will also graze on gunnera. So these methods can be combined with our herbicide treatment to kind of manage what might be in the seed bank and regrown as we go forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Trisha, there's a question here. The lever and mulch method is used for rhododendron control in Scotland. Is that something that's being looked at in Ireland as a methodology? And there's a second question there. It's basically, I suppose, why is treating the stumps so important? Does the chemical not translocate through the entire plant?
Yeah, so the mulching is it being trialled in a few different areas, Mícheál, but I suppose we're going with the tried and tested approach of the stump or the stem because we know that works. I suppose you would be afraid maybe when there is so many viable seeds that if you did mulch, you might be spreading it into a larger area. So we would be waiting there for more comprehensive studies to be carried out on that before we'd go encouraging anyone to do that. And the second part of the question, sorry, Mícheál.
Oh, the second one, yeah, in terms of chemical control with rhododendron, that you're treating the stumps. I suppose the question is, does it not, if you treated the leaf, does it not translocate through the plant?
Yeah, well, it'll be one treatment or the other. So if you go in and you do the stem treatment, it allows it to go up into the seed head and it goes down into the root system as well. But if you've got a larger plant, it might be very hard to actually do that, to physically get in. So that's why you get into the chainsaw and you do the stump treatment method instead. So you do the stump treatment, you'd cut it as low to the base. If you don't go below any of the growing nodes or branches or anything like that, it will continue to produce new shoots. So it is hard to do that because rocky sites and chainsaws wouldn't be friends.
Yeah, I suppose just from a farmer's point of view, if they have an invasive species on their land, what is the best protocol, or what should they do first, or what should they not do? That's a question open to any of the three.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, Mícheál, if they to contact us and we'll give them the best advice. They might be a farmer, but they might not be in the CP team, but we'd still be able to provide advice, you know. So I think let us know. And again, like Kate said, even making sure that it is the invasive that they think it is, because some of these can look similar to each other, but they might not be. Like I said, the rhododendron is 900 varieties, but it's only the ponticum that's the issue. So yeah.
Perfect. Question here, could you please explain how site-specific monitoring takes place, and in particular how the CP team monitors the potential impact to water quality from the use of the use of herbicides for treating the invasives? So I suppose the question is, how do we monitor, I suppose, within acres, how are invasives monitored, or how are they identified on the farms? And I suppose, does that develop into a map for an area?
Exactly, yeah. So if you decided, oh, Trisha, I want to get rid of the invasives on my farm, you send in an expression of interest to us and you'd say, I want to get rid of this rhododendron. We'd send the team out, then one of the staff, they'd go out, they'd map all the invasives, they'd look at the different infestation levels and we'd map it. What we'd be doing when we're on the site as well, we'd also be looking at where there is the presence of watercourses, we'd be taking that into account. And that's what would inform your plan then. Yeah.
Perfect. And I suppose in terms of the landscape actions, the farmers approach the CP teams, they work with the CP teams, and then it's for the different CP areas, I'm sure there's different target species or different non-invasive or invasive species in each area.
Yeah, so I suppose we would have a little mix of everything down here. We have a little bit of Himalayan balsam. We also have gunnera. We have Japanese knotweed, and we have rhododendron. I think the only ones we don't have are the salmonberry. And I think Lorraine would be very similar to ourselves in the West Connacht area. Yeah. So we would be, any invasive is bad to us, so we want to knock them all out. Yeah.
There was one question here actually, Lorraine. It's around Lochina and Kylemore and Galway. Is there any work being carried out on the New Zealand bird plant that's affecting ground nesting birds?
I'm not aware of what work has been done with that. It's not one I've heard about it. There's other places I know that it's coming up as a problem as well. I don't actually know what work they've done. I know Kylemore has done some work on other invasive species, but not in relation to that. So sorry, I don't have an answer.
Yeah, all right. No, look at it. I'm sure there's so many of them. In terms of control, some of them they all started off small at one point. Just a comment here that Cherry Laurel will say that it's still legally sold in garden centres in the north of Ireland. Is that the same in the Republic? Or I suppose a lot of these invasives would have originated from garden plants. And is there any regulation on the sale of them in Ireland now?
Yeah, so currently cherry laurel is still legally sold in Ireland because it's not on the regulated list. And then we have a number of species that are regulated. So if you think of like the rhododendron, the Japanese knotweed, so it would be illegal for those to be sold. But cherry laurel currently isn't regulated in Ireland.
There was one or two questions there in terms of organic farmers and invasive species. I suppose that's always going to be a query there, but what management practices are recommended on an organic farm, or are they treated differently, we'll say, than are they treated different to conventional farm?
So, Mícheál, it's with the Department of Agriculture at the moment and the certifying bodies. We're waiting for, we've been pushing for it. We've been highlighting the issue since the start of acres, and we've been gathering the data in terms of the spread and the kind of invasives they have on the farms that we've recorded with our organics farmers. And we've been sending that data up to the department. So we're hoping that the organics section there in the department will issue a circular soon on that, because it is a major issue for us. Yeah.
Just for yourself there, Kate, I see a comment here. Someone is looking for the link again to the National Biodiversity Data Centre. If you wouldn't mind posting it again.
I have that put in the chat there since you started, Mícheál.
Oh, perfect.
And I also put in the link to the CP teams as well. There was a question in about contacting the local CP teams. General link in there.
Perfect. Sorry, the questions are coming in thick and fast here. So, yeah, 1 second. Is there, what alien invasive species do the Department of Agriculture map as per indicative maps rather than site-specific plan maps? And is there a public viewer? So I suppose there's a lot of information there from the assessments done by advisors and by the CP teams through acres, but is that publicly available on a mapping system?
Not that I'm aware, Mícheál. I suppose a lot of you'd have GDPR issues maybe around it, so I think like a lot of the publicly available records would be held by the National Biodiversity Data Centre. But like you said, the department are gathering the data through the CP teams, the mapping that we're doing, and also the advisors when they're going out and they're noting the presence of invasives on the scorecards.
And we'll say for someone that has already completed professional user training as part of the integrated pest management, they may have completed it a number of years ago. Are there refresher courses a farmer can do? Or you might talk about, is there farmer training available on the control of invasives in acres?
Yeah, so the way we approach it, Mícheál, is they might have done it years ago, but I suppose we cover a lot of the things that are covered in that course. Again, as part of the training that we deliver to the farmers, we do a mandatory 3-hour training event. And we cover an awful lot of those things, everything from the biosecurity to the PPE, to the physical treatment, and even the mixing of the herbicide, mixing it appropriately. That'll all be covered at the training that's delivered by the CP teams.
Could I just as an extension of that, I know it's linked to this question here, is the likes of community groups or foresters or outside of the farmers themselves on private ground, is there training provided or available, or can that be made available to those type of groups?
So yeah, there's a number of groups, Cian, that have established down here and in West Cork, various community groups that just wanted to get going themselves, because obviously it's not all on farmland, it's a lot of it is emanating from private land as well, and there'd be no funding mechanism there. So they have gone to NPWS and they have received training, so they would do the pesticide user training course. Through that, they'd get funding and they'd go on and they'd do that. So there's a huge amount of resources. There's a huge amount online as well. But we'd always make ourselves available, because we think the more people that know how to do it and do it appropriately, and doing it appropriately is the key thing to say, I suppose. So
I just recall there's actually the call for leadership funding for biodiversity matters now, and there's funding for that for established groups for training. I think it's up 100% funded for training on this type of issue as well. So I'm just wondering, further than that, then there's a few questions. I know it's been partially addressed there, just about the different things that are happening with the brash that's been lifted. So particularly where the woody species are cut out. Do you want to make a comment on just some of the things that are being done with that, or that you're aware of being done with the brash in different areas?
Yeah, so there are people exploring biochar, I suppose, Cian, as an option, because when you look at rhododendron, for example, it's got a very high calorific value. So it burns really, really hot. And like I said, when you have a big invasive issue with rhododendron, you can be left with a lot of brash. It depends on the site. Sometimes trying to remove any brash from the site, you have to make sure your plant is dead. It's illegal to move anything otherwise. So a lot of the time we'd recommend that you leave the brash there and actually just I suppose bundle it as much as you can. But in previous projects in our previous EIP, we would have done very contained burning on burning frames, and we would have stacked the dead rhododendron on top of it, and we would have burnt them on site. Again, it was where there was so much brash being generated, it was difficult to get into the next area without kind of getting rid of the other stuff. But that's not permitted at the moment. So it's just to work tidy, I suppose, and work clear, because sites are different, and you don't want to go in afterwards, try and remove brash and actually spray any viable seeds that are left. So we're saying leave them in situ for the moment.
Just one more for me for the minute. I just wondered there, maybe I'll go to Kate first, is, there are a number of queries in here about things which are locally significant. So, I know we focused on kind of two main species here, but one of the questions here is on Montbretia. I know some of the areas I would have worked in, Himalayan balsam was a significant problem. I just wondered there, so in those areas, is there a point of reference? Where's the first point of contact? Is it back to your group, Kate, or where else should people like that who are concerned about what's happening locally?
Well, certainly people can report the sightings of the invasive species to us at the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and you can log on to our website, invasives.ie. But there's no coordinated action, I guess, on Mount Brescia because, again, currently it's not a regulated species. So we do know it grows along like roadsides, particularly in the west of Ireland. But I'm not aware of any coordinated action on that species. And then Himalayan balsam is a regulated species. And as Lorraine was saying, you'll find it along water courses there where it can impact on the habitats. And what we have now is we have groups going out, community groups, to actually tackle it. And they go out on these balsam bashes. And unlike some of the other species mentioned today where you need herbicide, you actually don't need any herbicide to control Himalayan balsam. You can simply pull up the stem. And that's usually done from June onwards. And so there's actually lots of balsam bashes happening this week for Invasive Species Week.
Just with regard to rhododendron there, if you see individual plants, we would have walked a lot of peatland and you'd come across individual plants where they'd have traveled, the seeds would have traveled. Is pulling them enough? A lot of them will just pull clean out of the soil. Is that enough out of the peat?
No, it's quite difficult, Cian, because you might think you have it all, but the root system, even like something like the biro here in my hand, like what you're seeing above the ground it's extending an awful lot below, and you might pull it, but you could break the root, so that's still going to continue growing inside. So you'd be better off just to actually give it a little tiny nick. You could even do it with your fingernail or a penknife, and then give it teensy little bit of herbicide. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a million. Mícheál, I'll go back to you for a few before we try and wrap it up.
A question here just in terms of brash, that is there any toxicity issue with spreading rhododendron or laurel brash that may have been chipped and spread? Is there, I suppose, if it has been chipped and is being reused, is there any chance that that's going to cause plants?
The honest answer, Mícheál, is I don't know. If that might be a job for Teagasc for a bit of research to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of bits and pieces that are there's definitely more room for research. I suppose the main points there for anyone really with dealing with the invasives is education is key. Some of them that someone has a comment here that balsam bashing is a lot of fun. So that's one method of control that's effective, but it mightn't work. It could cause spread for a lot of other ones. So just, I suppose that's another fire risk from brash. Is that something that we should be concerned about? That if we're controlling invasives, we'll say the cuttings, should we be chipping them on site, or do you let the material gather?
I think you'd probably just try and stack the material, because again, trying to remove it from some sites, particularly peatlands, you could go in and you could cause more harm to the actual peatland by trying to remove it, So I suppose like you don't want huge stacks everywhere. You'd probably have smaller stacks in and about, but you'd want to make sure that if you are doing the stump treatment and if you are using a chainsaw, that you're being very tidy and methodical about the work. Yeah.
Perfect. Cian, do you want anything else there you want to?
I'm just wondering, are there any? There's lots of questions here about carrying out the actual work. So, good few questions on different aspects of using glyphosate. So from your own personal protection to how you manage the brash itself, or whether there's a lasting effect, and then subsequently water quality, whether that's impacted and how you'd be really targeted in this. I'm just wondering, it's difficult to address all them in this forum. Are there resources or videos or anything like that there that we can direct people towards to kind of visually see what are the best practices?
Yeah, a few of the pieces that I put in there at the end of my slide, the very last slide, Cian, we can make those available to people afterwards. You know, like we have a little leaflet, very simple, straightforward leaflet that I said was done in conjunction with the Kerry UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and it gives you what you need in terms of the PPE and then actually physically how to go about the treatment. There's excellent YouTube videos that were done with the Kerry UNESCO Biosphere as well on rhododendron. So there's an awful lot available online. Killarney National Park have been treating rhododendron for years. They have resources as well online. So YouTube is probably the place to go. And then there's the Irish Wildlife Manual. I don't know, is it number 33 or 35, but that could be Google as well if you look up Irish Wildlife Manual, Rhododendron Ponticum. It's an excellent piece of research that was done a number of years ago now, but it explains how it's done in detail. Yeah. And explains a bit about the background as well on rhododendron itself.
Okay, that's brilliant. We are just slightly over time. What I was going to say was, so at the end of this, I'd like to thank my panel here. So to Trisha, Kate and Lorraine. Oh yes, that's it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What I'm thinking is there were so many questions. We can see, Mícheál, you did well to get through them. There was a lot of them that are still there. Maybe what we'll do is we'll try and amalgamate a few and we can circulate a list and possibly a couple of links to some of those things that you've already said there. Just about resources, because there was a huge number of questions coming in. So there's obviously real interest in this and a good crowd on this morning as well. So I'm just thinking maybe we'll do that. Possibly it'll take a couple of days to compile, but we'll send it on. I can see Trisha's dropped a link there in the chat as well for anyone there, so we can compile these and send them out on a circular next week to the audience. So my thanks to Kate, to Lorraine, to Trisha and to Mícheál for handling the questions there. A lot of work on that this morning with the great interest that's there. Next week our webinar is on nature-based solutions showing impact in Kilkenny. So it's directly on water quality and what they are doing with nature-based solutions in order to try and alleviate any of those issues. My thanks to everyone for joining, to our team in the background, and we will see you next week.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson and thanks for listening.